couple MPs, they asked for a meeting, and they slammed a stack of papers on their desk, and it was just all the emails that they got that they printed up. So let me tell you, they were really upset with me. And Ryan, you know what I said? Well, I'm really upset with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, off the heels of Mark Carney securing his majority government by way of floor crossers and 3 by-elections, Mr. Carney decided to come out today and offer some scraps to the Canadian public by means of a 10-cent reduction in fuel prices because he's suspending the federal excise tax, not permanently, just from April 20th until Labor Day. Is this sufficient? Is it better than nothing? Other countries have already done this over a month ago. Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Germany, several others. And it seems like we're not the ones showing leadership when it comes to managing the affordability crisis after all, Mr. Carney. So here to join us to talk about that today is Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. Franco, thanks for joining us on Northern Perspective.
Hey, Ryan, it's always my pleasure, and I love the intro that you just gave. Like you're pretty much summing up my thoughts, man.
Well, we're usually on the same page, except you have all the analysis to back it up, and I just have my opinion because you are far more educated in all things economics. Heck, your Twitter handle is Frankonomics, so that says something. But what was your reaction, your colleagues' reaction at the CTF when news of this broke?
A couple. I mean, number one is about time. Right? Like, look, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we've been calling for gas tax cuts for like a long time, right? Not only did we start calling for it immediately when you saw the prices surge, what was it, a couple months ago now? Everything's flying so fast, but we started calling for this like months ago. But even before that, like we have been banging the drum for gas tax relief for years and years and years, right? So like, look, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, all of our supporters, we've been pushing the government for gas tax cuts. So obviously I'm happy that Carney is, providing some tax relief. Now, but, before we get into the nuts and bolts, Ryan, I'll just say, like, I think you nailed it already. Number one, this is temporary, right? This is a couple months. So it's going to provide some relief for a couple months. Number two, there are still federal gas taxes that you pay every time you fuel up, right? We can get into the details, but you got the federal sales tax. You have federal fuel regulations, which are, in effect, a hidden carbon tax. And then you also have the industrial carbon tax that Carney is going to keep cranking up year after year after year. Number three is we got to see the federal government actually cut spending to A, make this tax cut permanent, to B, cut the other taxes that are making life more expensive, and to C, to stop spiraling the debt. So that's like my elevator pitch on my thoughts on this temporary gas tax relief.
Do you think it is, good enough? Do you think, Canadians should be grateful for, the 10-cent reduction that we're going to get? Or is this something that we should say, yeah, thanks for that, but I want the rest of it as well?
That's a good question, right? And I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I think it's, look, cutting taxes is a good thing. It's a good thing. And regardless of the political stripe or jersey that you favor, I do think it's a good thing that the federal government cut gas taxes. And this is something that we've been pushing for a very long time, as I mentioned. Does it go far enough? No. Right? This is for a couple months. It is going to provide relief, and it is going to help a lot of people who are struggling for a couple months. But it's only a couple months as of now. We're going to push to make this permanent, right? So it should be permanent. You asked, does it go far enough? Well, we're very much on the record saying scrap the gas tax, scrap the sales tax on tax, and scrap all carbon taxes. In fact, a couple weeks ago, I was in Parliament Hill I was in a parliamentary committee demanding all those things happen. Right. So obviously, I don't think it goes far enough, even though I do support gas tax relief. Another thing that has to happen here, we have to talk about this. The federal government has to cut spending. Right. Because, I think one of the things that Carney has been able to skate around as of yet, but it is actually very damaging, is the massive debt tab that Carney is racking up. And even if you look at the last budget, right, I think most Canadians bought this idea that the banker was going to be better with the numbers than the drama teacher. But, Carney plans to add, almost twice as much debt over the next 5 years than what even Trudeau was planning. So, maybe just sum this up. I think gas tax relief is good. You asked, does it go far enough? No, it doesn't. This is just for a couple months. We got to make it permanent. And as what we've been calling for, and also let's, throw some cookies out too. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre has also been pushing for the government to end all taxes on gasoline.
Why do you think it took him so long? Because we saw about a month ago, all of these other countries in Europe, Mark Carney's buddies, they all moved very quickly to actually, cut the taxes on fuel for their voters and their citizens. But it took Mark Carney weeks and weeks and weeks, and it took Pierre Poilievre putting pressure on them, the Canadian Taxpayer Federation putting pressure on them. Why do you think they waited so long, and why do you think they're doing this only for a minimal amount of time?
Well, I think when it comes, look, and I'll just go back to the track record of the Liberal government over the last 10 plus years. I think cutting gas taxes is not exactly the thing they want to do, right? Like, why did it took the Trudeau government? When did they bring in the consumer carbon tax? 2019? Well, how long did it take them? About 6 years to finally admit they were wrong, right? So, look, I just think it's their inclination not to cut gas taxes, right? And look, I'm just going by their own track record. Like, I remember for years going to Parliament Hill and, getting into these heated debates with MPs in the government benches over carbon taxes and gas taxes, right? Even when I was there to speak on the industrial carbon tax and the fuel regulations and the tax on tax, still got pushback from the government MPs. So I just think it's not their first inclination. I think the pressure just got so big, so loud from a lot of people who, Ryan, quite frankly, listen to your show as well, right? Just ordinary people. I think the pressure just got so big, so massive from ordinary Canadians that both follow the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and, of course, Northern Perspective. I think the pressure built from the official opposition and Pierre Poilievre. And I also just think the pressure was building from around the world, right? You mentioned there's at least a handful of countries, many of our peers, who have been cutting gas taxes for the last, month or two, right? So the pressure was just so obvious that they just couldn't get away with it. And, I do think Carney has learned some lessons from the failings of Trudeau, right? I honestly think so, where one of the reasons that Trudeau, plummeted in the polls is because it was so obvious that his government was so out of touch to the concerns facing everyday Canadians. And I just think Carney is looking at those lessons and doesn't want to repeat those same mistakes.
Well, and perhaps one of the reasons why they're not making it permanent, as you said, is they have a massive deficit and they can't really afford to be releasing any further tax revenue, no matter where it's coming from, over the next little bit. So I guess they're trying to do this to show that we're hearing you. To your point, they're trying to show that they're in touch with the average Joe that's just trying to pay their gas to get to work and to drive their family around and get groceries. But he also has, heck, it's probably projected over 100 billion in deficit now in terms of the yearly spending that we're at, with all of these new spending initiatives that weren't even counted in the budget. So he has to get that money from somewhere, or, to your point, he has to cut. And it doesn't seem that he wants to cut. So the only, well, there's only two ways to handle money in government: is you either tax people or you make cuts. Like, there's nothing else. That's all they have.
Well, you can print some money too, which we saw during the pandemic, right? And that's what happened, where the central bank printed up hundreds of billions of dollars right out of thin air, and then poof, 40-year high inflation. Who could have predicted that? I actually will go back because there really were like two major people out in the media back then talking about how the money printing deficits lead to inflation. And one was conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, right? He was, out front of that. I think the only other person was talking to you right now, Ryan, to be honest with you, right? But look, like, I love that you bring this up, because the debt is a huge problem. The debt is a massive problem. You look at last year's deficit, the year that just ended for the government, and they're borrowing about $80 billion that year. But again, we don't have the final numbers, so who knows how high and how much they're actually borrowing. I will say, like, this is why I made those comments right up front that Carney has to cut spending, right? Because you can't let the debt spiral out of control, and you got to cut spending to provide that further room to make this tax cut permanent and to go further, right? To end the sales tax on tax. And by the way, right, how crazy is it that not only do you pay for fuel prices, but then you pay for taxes on the fuel, and then they tax those taxes with sales taxes? Isn't that gross? But the last thing I'll say on that is, like, look, the federal government has just so much fat to cut, right? And, Carney likes to talk about cutting spending, but you see the main estimates for this year. And Ryan, I know you know this, but for anyone who's listening who don't know what the main estimates are, it's just the government's main spending plan for the upcoming year. It's not all their spending, but it's the main spending plan. And I went through the main estimates, and it shows that the Carney government is spending $18 billion more through this year's spending plan compared to last year. So $18 billion spending hike. And let me just say, we're talking about all the fat. Like, I'll just give you a couple examples. Let's start with a small one, but just one that ticks me off. Carney and his entourage dropping $500,000 on airplane food in 1 year, right? Gross. Then you got the big things like corporate welfare costing us like $11 billion a year, right? That's a cost to the average family of four of like $1,100 a year. Then what about the $90 billion high-speed rail boondoggle, right? So, like, to any pundit out there, you can't tell me with a straight face that there isn't a whole bunch of places for the federal government to cut.
You mean you don't spend $21,000 on a 2-hour flight for catering going from Canada to Washington?
$7,000 an hour. Look, I don't even know how you eat that much food, but also too, like, Ryan, like, I'm pretty sure like WestJet or Air Canada, you can't even get a hot meal on a flight that short.
No.
Right? Like, it's absolutely crazy. And $500,000, right? Like, that is the a family could buy 30 years worth of groceries for that amount of money. And, like, remember, folks, like, that is your money. That is like $500,000 of your money that Carney and his entourage dropped on airplane food. It also comes after a time when the government promised Canadian taxpayers that it was going to cut down on these extravagant flights. You might remember the huge scandal over the Governor General when she billed $100,000 for airplane food, right? Her officials dragged to committee multiple times. The government promised to do better. Well, let me tell you, dropping $500,000 on airplane food in 1 year doesn't exactly scream, I'm sorry, or fiscal responsibility.
Well, and I think Frank Caputo, he put out a question to the Carney government over social media, and he asked, how many $16 glasses of orange juice goes into $524,000?
Yeah, a lot. A lot. I'm laughing because I should be crying. It drives me nuts, but here we are, folks.
So I want to go back to something you touched on, though, because it is really, really important. And it does demonstrate that Canadians do still have power in this country, even as Mark Carney ends up securing a majority government. And that's pressure. The Canadian people have an ability to exert enormous pressure on their MPs and on the government itself. Because let's be real, Mark Carney didn't have to drop the excise tax. He didn't have to give us any sort of relief, especially on the morning after he secures a majority government. So this is actually a positive demonstration that even Mark Carney has to be forced to listen to the will of the Canadian people sometimes. So, what is your message to Canadians that may be thinking, you know what, petitions don't do anything, contacting MPs don't do anything, contacting senators don't do anything?
Oh, of course it does. Of course it does. Yeah. I mean, and I can tell you they read those emails. Okay. Like, I'm not going to say any names because it was a private conversation, but I remember going to committee remember when the politicians tried to move the election back a week so that a whole bunch that didn't deserve it could get their taxpayer funded pension? Well, I went to committee, and a couple MPs afterwards, not going to name their names, they asked for a meeting, and they slammed a stack of papers on their desk, and it was just all the emails that they got that they printed up. So let me tell you, they were really upset with me. And Ryan, you know what I said? Well, I'm really upset with you. Do the right thing. But that just goes to show, right? Like they read these emails, right? The pressure does work. And like to your point, like and I'll just talk from a taxpayer perspective, because I mean I'm with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. But if you were to tell me 2-3 years ago that a Liberal prime minister would cancel the consumer carbon tax and also suspend federal gas taxes even temporarily, I would have thought you were crazy. But this is the sustained pressure from people. And Ryan, to anyone watching this video who get our emails, like they know that we've been ramping up pressure to email Carney, to email other politicians to cut gas taxes. So I can tell you firsthand, I know that politicians have been getting hundreds, if not thousands, of emails pushing for this. Right. Another example, we've talked consumer carbon tax, we've talked pensions, we've talked this gas tax, is also the capital gains tax increase. Trudeau and Freeland, they brought it in. They wanted to take billions of dollars from Canadians. And there was just sustained pressure from ordinary people pushing back. That certainly helped push Carney to cancel that capital gains tax increase. You see the electric vehicle mandate, right? They've retreated from the outright ban on the sale of gas and diesel vehicles by 2035. Yes, Carney brought in some regulations that I think are going to be costly and almost unrealistic, but it was a clear retreat. So folks, time after time after time, because these politicians are worried about keeping their cushy political jobs, we have shown that taxpayers in this case, when it's thousands of them taking action continuously and frequently, we can beat back bad policy.
Well, all I can say from the on behalf of all of taxpayers, never mind, conservative leaning or otherwise, thank you for doing what you do, because your organization, as you know, but this is for the benefit of the viewers, it's nonpartisan. You don't care who's in power. You care about low taxes for the average Canadian. We work hard enough for our money, and we deserve to keep as much of it as possible without the tax man having his hand in our back pocket.
Yeah, radical thought, I know. Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right, man. Like, people work so hard, right? So hard for the money they earn and the taxes they pay. And I just know, like, especially right now over the last couple of years, like everything is so expensive. So it really just boils my blood when I see the stories. Like I mentioned, Carney and his entourage spending $500,000 on airplane food, because you know what? That money doesn't belong to the government. That is money taken from Canadians' pockets, right? That should be Canadians' money. And when I see that money getting wasted like that, it drives me crazy. And I know that there's so much fat in Ottawa that they could cut so that they're not taking so much money from people in the first place.